Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. In 1993, a fire gutted the Langford family home in Cedar Falls, Iowa. All 5 members of the family were presumed dead until a firefighter found a girl standing in the woods, barefoot and staring at the blaze. She wouldn't speak, she didn't run, and no one ever claimed her. The case was buried, ruled accidental. But 3 decades later, when a true crime podcaster reopens the story, he uncovers a chilling trail: missing medical records, falsified autopsies, and someone systematically killing anyone who asks the wrong questions. What really happened that night in 1993? Who was the girl in the woods? And how far will someone go to protect the truth? The fire started at 2:17 a.m. It was cold. January 4th, 1993. The kind of cold that made your breath feel like broken glass and the snow crunch like bones underfoot. The Langford house sat at the edge of a sparse forest on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Iowa, just off Old Quarry Road. A large 2-story Victorian farmhouse with aging shutters and a gabled attic, it was a picturesque home surrounded by snow-covered pines. By dawn, it was nothing but blackened rubble. Fire officials would later say it was one of the most intense residential blazes they'd ever encountered. The flames moved too fast. The structure collapsed too neatly, and 5 people were reported dead. But the fire didn't kill all of them. The call emergency dispatch received the first 911 call from a trucker named Daniel Hirsch, who'd been driving along the rural bypass when he saw an orange glow lighting up the tree line. At 2:22 a.m., Cedar Falls Fire Station No. 3 was dispatched to the scene. Captain Wallace "Wally" Dunn was first to arrive. His account, taken hours later, never made the official report, but it was preserved on the back of a handwritten incident log. Saw a small figure near tree line. Thought it was a deer. Turned out to be a child. Female. Maybe 8 to 10 years old. Wearing white nightgown, barefoot. Didn't speak, didn't blink. Just watched the house burn. When Wally approached the girl, she didn't run. She simply turned her head slowly and looked directly into his eyes. Then she passed out. The Langfords. The Langford family were well known in Cedar Falls. Dr. Matthew Langford, 43, a respected cardiologist at Mercy One Hospital. Margaret Langford, 41, a homemaker and active PTA volunteer. Eleanor Ellie Langford, 13, top of her middle school class. Sam Langford, 10, quiet, always reading. Lucy Langford, 6, the youngest, full of energy, loved to dance. All presumed dead. All bodies recovered in the remains of the house over the next 48 hours. Except, there was no dental confirmation. The bodies were too badly burned for visual ID, and DNA testing wasn't widely accessible in small-town Iowa in 1993. The coroner relied on circumstantial identifiers, sizes, positions, location in beds, to match the remains with family members. No autopsies were performed, and no one asked why. The girl. The girl from the woods was taken to St. Luke's Psychiatric Center in Waterloo, 25 miles from Cedar Falls. At first, she wouldn't speak. She refused food. Medical staff couldn't identify her. She had no burns, no smoke damage, not even frostbite despite standing barefoot in the snow. Her chart read, JANEDOE number 4571 age, approximately 9 race, Caucasian distinguishing features, scar on right wrist, crescent-shaped birthmark on left shoulder. After 2 weeks, she spoke her first word, fire. A day later, she said another. It watched. Then nothing. No family came forward. No missing persons reports matched her. And then 2 months later, she disappeared. vanished from a locked facility in the middle of the night. Security footage, erased. Staff logs, blank. Room contents, empty. The only thing left was a crude drawing scrawled in crayon on the wall, a house on fire, and a face in the window. Not a person, a face, something watching. The file is closed. The Cedar Falls PD closed the case by midsummer. The official report concluded that faulty wiring had caused the Langford fire. The child found at the scene was labeled as a transient juvenile likely unrelated to the event, despite being barefoot in a nightgown within yards of the fire. The bodies were buried in the Langford family plot at Rose Hill Cemetery. The remains were sealed under a closed casket ceremony. By 1995, the Langford home site had been bulldozed, the woods behind it sold off, and the records stored in a dusty file box deep in the county archives, misfiled under accidental residential fires. And the girl? Never mentioned again. Present day. Enter Jackson Redd, January 2023. Jackson Redd, 34, former local journalist turned true crime podcaster, had returned to Cedar Falls after nearly a decade away. His podcast, Midwest Macabre, was gaining traction for its focus on unsolved and forgotten cases across the Rust Belt. But it was personal tragedy that brought him home. His mother had passed unexpectedly, leaving him her modest house on Garden Street and a garage full of boxes she never threw away. It was there, digging through her things, that he found it. A manila folder marked Langford, 1993, St. Luke's. Inside were printed medical charts, incident logs, and 3 grainy Polaroids, all of the same girl. Same white nightgown, same wide, terrified eyes. On the back of one, in his mother's handwriting, she said the fire had hands. Jackson's mom had been a nurse at St. Luke's in 1993. She'd treated the girl, and for some reason, she'd kept the file all these years. The podcast begins. Jackson released episode 1 of Midwest Macabre, The Langford Fire on January 14, 2023. He laid out what the public had never known. The 5th body was never identified with certainty. No autopsies had been performed. The mystery girl had been taken to St. Luke's and then vanished. Within 72 hours, the episode had over 100,000 downloads. Within a week, Jackson received over 80 emails, many from former residents of Cedar Falls with chilling recollections. One anonymous message stood out. "You're not wrong, but you're not ready. Check the well behind the old Langford property before they find you first." Attached was a photo, a rusty old well, and next to it, a child's shoe, returned to the ashes. It had been 30 years, but the woods were the same. Jackson walked the snow-covered path behind what used to be the Langford house. The trees whispered the way they do in deep winter, empty branches hissing against each other. It was dusk, cold. He followed the GPS coordinates from the photo, and there it was, the well, half collapsed, covered in dead vines, and at its edge, buried in snow, a tiny leather shoe. He picked it up, size 2, blue stitching, faded but intact. Suddenly, a crack, not from the well, from behind him. Jackson turned. A man stood at the tree line, tall, silent, wearing a sheriff's department jacket from decades ago. He didn't move, just stared, and then vanished behind the trees. When Jackson scrambled after him, there was no one there. No footprints, no tracks, just wind and snow, and the faint smell of smoke. January 15th, 2023. The morning after finding the well and the child's shoe, Jackson Redd sat in his mother's kitchen with trembling hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. He hadn't slept. The image of that man, the sheriff's jacket, the blank stare, played on a loop in his mind. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there, and they didn't want the truth uncovered. The St. Luke's Files Jackson spread the contents of the manila folder across the kitchen table. He'd seen hundreds of case files during his time as a crime reporter. These were real. Discharge notes, psych evaluations, even a log entry written in shorthand. JD 4571 remains mute. Draws same image repeatedly. Large figure in flames, arms too long, no face. Reports burning sensations, though no burns exist. Avoids mirrors. Appears to recognize certain staff, but no connections found. But one sheet stood out. A transfer request, dated February 27, 1993, 3 days before the girl vanished. Destination, private juvenile facility. Confidential reason, non-compliance, long-term treatment. Signed by Dr. M. Greaves Jackson checked. There was no record of a doctor. M. Greaves ever working at St. Luke's. Fake name, fake transfer, and then the girl vanished. A new clue. After releasing episode 2 of the podcast, Jackson received a message through his website. It read, "My aunt was a nurse at St. Luke's in 1993. She kept journals. Said they locked the girl in the hydrotherapy room because she was drawing something wrong on the walls. Said the girl wouldn't sleep. Screamed at night about something watching her through the ceiling." Attached was a scan of a journal page. The nurse's handwriting was frantic. She kept repeating, "Lucy, Lucy, Lucy." That's the youngest Langford child. But the girl doesn't match Lucy's age or description, unless she is Lucy and everyone's lying. Jackson's heart pounded. Could the girl in the woods have been Lucy Langford? Was it possible one of the Langford children survived the fire and had her identity erased? He dug through the St. Luke's file. The photos, the drawings, the medical notes. He stopped at a psychological assessment. Patient has crescent birthmark on left shoulder. Matches known identifier from Lucy Langford's pediatric records. There it was. But why cover it up? Why pretend she was a Jane Doe? Voices from the past. Jackson drove to the Cedar Falls Public Library to search archived newspapers from 1993. The Langford fire had made front-page news, of course, but the follow-up articles raised more questions than they answered. 5 bodies found, cause likely electrical. Young girl at scene not connected to victims. Community mourns tragedy, moves on. There were no quotes from the fire captain, Wally Dunn. No mention of the mysterious girl after the initial report. And oddly, no obituary for Lucy Langford. Only a group mention of the Langford children. Back at home, Jackson recorded episode 3, laying out his theory. Lucy Langford survived. The girl in the woods was her. For some reason, the Cedar Falls authorities, maybe even higher, chose to erase her identity, label her as an unconnected Jane Doe, and bury the truth. Why? What did Lucy see that night? What did she survive? A stranger reaches out. That night, Jackson received a phone call from an unlisted number. A woman's voice, low and shaky. "You're getting too close." He sat upright. "Who is this?" "They'll hurt you like they hurt the others. Stop digging." "Wait, do you know what happened to Lucy Langford?" There was a pause, and then, "I am Lucy Langford." Click. Silence. The basement recordings. The next morning, Jackson returned to the boxes in his mother's garage. If she'd kept one file, maybe she'd kept more. He opened a crate labeled VHS-90S-Med Training. Beneath a layer of old CPR training tapes was one with peeling handwriting. Jane Doe, number 4571, St. Luke's, Observation Room 2. He rushed to a friend's house with a working VCR. The tape opened with grainy black and white footage of a small, pale girl sitting on a bed in a concrete room. Same white nightgown, hair matted, eyes vacant. She was drawing on the walls again and again with a black crayon. The same image, a tall, faceless figure engulfed in flames. Every few minutes, she'd freeze, stare upward, and whisper something. Jackson turned up the volume. He's in the ceiling. He watches. He paused the tape. He had to find that room. Back to St. Luke's, though, Street. Luke's had closed in 2007. The building still stood, abandoned, covered in graffiti and overgrown ivy. Locals said it was haunted. Teens dared each other to break in. Jackson didn't hesitate. He brought a flashlight, a crowbar, and a GoPro strapped to his chest. The inside was worse than he imagined. Collapsed ceilings, rusted wheelchairs, shattered glass crunching underfoot. He followed the blueprint he'd found online to the old hydrotherapy wing. Room 2 still had its number, and inside, faint but visible on the crumbling walls, the same drawings, dozens of them. A flame-covered figure with arms that reached the floor. He stepped closer. One of the images had been drawn in something darker than crayon, brown-red. Blood? The lights flickered, except there was no power. Something creaked above him. He turned the flashlight upward, just pipes, just ceiling tiles, just darkness. Then something moved. The second warning. He sprinted out of the building and didn't stop until he reached his car. Inside, panting, heart pounding, he reviewed the GoPro footage. At the exact moment the ceiling creaked, the microphone picked up a low whisper. He played it back, isolated the audio. A single word. Lucy. Another dead end. Or not. He uploaded episode 4 with a warning. If something happens to me, the footage is backed up. The St. Luke's facility was a prison. That girl, Lucy, wasn't treated. She was hidden. We need to know why. 2 days later, a padded envelope arrived at his door. No return address. Inside, a burned, warped cassette tape labeled Langford, January 3, 1993, Interview A. Jackson dug out an old tape player. Static. Then a voice. Male. Nervous. This is Officer Harold Dykstra, Cedar Falls PD, interviewing minor survivor of the Langford fire. Name redacted per order. Then a child's voice. Faint. Raspy. It wasn't a fire. It was him. He's made of fire. Who's him, sweetheart? He lives in the walls. Daddy knew. That's why he locked the attic. That's why he said not to look in the mirror. You said he watches you? He's always been there. And what's his name? The child's voice dropped to a whisper. He doesn't have a name, but he knows mine. Old faces, new secrets. Jackson searched the name Officer Harold Dykstra. Turns out, he'd been on the force until 1995, then retired early, moved to Florida. Jackson called every Dykstra in the Sarasota area until one answered and said, "That's my uncle." But he died 2 weeks ago. House fire. Weird, right? Jackson's stomach sank. Every person connected to the original case was disappearing. The final piece. He returned to the well behind the Langford property. This time, he brought a camera crew, 2 friends from his journalism school days, now working with him on the podcast. Together, they lowered a GoPro on a rope into the well. It hit something. They pulled it up. On screen, bones, small, human, and clutched in a tiny hand, melted plastic, a half-burned Barbie doll, the same doll Lucy Langford was holding in every family photo. Someone had buried a child there, which begged the terrifying question, if that's Lucy Langford in the well, who was the girl at St. Luke's? The revelation at the bottom of the well changed everything. If the remains found there were truly those of Lucy Langford, the youngest child supposedly killed in the 1993 house fire, then the girl in St. Luke's, the one who screamed about walls, flames, and things with no names, wasn't Lucy. Which meant someone lied. For 30 years, someone maintained a deception so deep it erased the identity of a living child and covered up the brutal murder of another. And now, after Jackson had pulled back just one layer, people were dying. The DNA test. Jackson turned the footage and photographs of the bones over to the Cedar Falls Police Department. He didn't trust them, not after their years of silence. But protocol was protocol. The doll, the size, the well's proximity. Everything pointed to Lucy. But Jackson needed confirmation. So he contacted Dr. Elena Rourke, a forensic anthropologist at the University of Iowa. With her help and the blessing of a reluctant local judge, the remains were quickly transferred to her lab for examination and DNA testing. 3 days later, her call came in. "Jackson, it's her. It's Lucy Langford." Silence on the line. Then Jackson muttered, "Then who the hell was that girl?" The real Jane Doe, in episode 5 of the podcast, Jackson shared everything he knew. He didn't just focus on the bones. He laid out a chilling theory. Someone removed a girl from the Langford house fire, alive, and passed her off as Lucy Langford. But why would they do that unless the girl wasn't a Langford at all, but someone else who wasn't supposed to be there? Someone they couldn't explain, someone they needed to erase. What if the fire wasn't just a tragedy? What if it was the cleanup? His inbox exploded. One message in particular stood out. Subject line: "Not the first fire." The sender: anonymous. The message: "Check March 1981, Russell Township. Fire at Thorne Family Farm. 5 dead. 1 girl found alive. Said she had no name. She drew the same things." Attached was a police photo. A little girl, 7, maybe 8, wrapped in a blanket. Eyes vacant, holding a melted doll. The same doll Lucy Langford had clutched. A pattern of Ash Jackson dug deeper. The 1981 Thorne fire had faded into obscurity, but records showed that Dr. M. Greaves, the same mysterious doctor from St. Luke's, had filed the psychiatric report on the surviving girl. That girl was committed to Rosewood Asylum in 1983. 2 years later, the facility burned down. No survivors. But something stood out. A note from a nurse at Rosewood, written just days before the fire. Patient continues to draw images of tall, burning man. Refers to him as the Watcher. Screams when placed near mirrors. Claims he talks to her through the furnace. Jackson couldn't breathe. It was all happening again. Different girl, different fire, same drawings, same Watcher. The archivist. To understand the possible connections between the two cases, Jackson reached out to Rory Janovich, a local historian who specialized in Iowa's forgotten institutions. Janovich was skeptical at first, but after Jackson played him excerpts from the Jane Doe tapes and showed him the drawings, his face turned pale. That symbol, look, in the girl's drawings, the triangle with the open eye above the flames. Jackson nodded. He'd seen it etched into one of the walls at St. Luke's. That's from the Order of the Eternal Watch, an obscure religious sect from the 1800s. Supposedly they believed a being of flame and silence lived beneath the earth. They performed rituals to keep it appeased, mostly involving children. Children? They said the Watcher needed to see itself through innocence, whatever that means. Janovich handed Jackson a photocopied document, a page from an 1884 diary. The children draw his form in ash. They never speak his name. He comes through the cracks and the mirrors, through the eyes of fire. Jackson felt cold. Was it possible this was all part of something far older? The sheriff's silence. Remembering the man he saw in the woods, the one in the sheriff's jacket, Jackson paid a visit to Sheriff Arnold Wilkes, who had served in Cedar Falls for nearly 40 years and was now in retirement. He lived in a small home surrounded by wind chimes and a yard full of crows. At first, Wilkes was friendly, but the moment Jackson mentioned St. Luke's, his demeanor changed. That place is gone for a reason, burned out of memory. "I have recordings, Sheriff. There was a girl. She wasn't Lucy. She saw something in the house, in the attic. You talk too much. Was she part of the Langford family? The sheriff stepped closer. There was no attic. But Jackson knew he was lying, because blueprints didn't lie. And the Langford house did, in fact, have a sealed-off attic space, marked clearly on the original 1970 permit application. So what was up there? The Langford attic. The house was gone, of course. Burned in '93, bulldozed in '95. But the foundation remained, buried under weeds and time. Jackson and his crew returned with a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed from a construction contact. Anomalies were found near the northeast corner of the foundation, suggesting a sealed substructure or shaft, roughly 12 feet deep. They dug. What they found wasn't an attic. It was a crawl space, cemented over, and beneath it, a hatch door bolted shut. It took nearly 2 hours to unseal. Inside was a square chamber, blackened with soot, filled with melted dolls, children's shoes, and burned paper. And on the walls, drawings, the same as before. The burning man, the watcher, the flames. But this time, something new. A phrase scrawled over and over. "He wears their faces." Jackson nearly dropped the camera. The mirror game back at his apartment, Jackson replayed everything. The drawings, the whispers on tape, the mention of mirrors. So he did something reckless. He turned off every light, stood before the bathroom mirror, and whispered, "I see you." At first, nothing. Then his breath fogged the glass, not from his own breath, but from the other side. He leaned in, and for just a split second the fog spelled something. Jane isn't dead. He stumbled backward. Who was Jane? The Jane Doe from St. Luke's. The burn list. The final straw came when his laptop, always kept offline unless uploading, received an untraceable file, a .txt document, titled ashes_001. Inside, a list of 22 names, all connected to fires across Iowa since 1979. Children, survivors, witnesses, and next to each name, eliminated, missing, converted. The last name on the list? Jackson read, in progress. The message on the mirror had been brief, just 3 words fogged on the glass. Jane isn't dead. Jackson stared at it, pulse racing as it quickly vanished. He'd always believed the girl in the recordings, the one screaming from her locked room at St. Luke's, was dead. She had to be. No records, no real name, no trace after the hospital fire. But this message suggested otherwise. If she wasn't dead, then where was she? And who had been trying to erase her existence all these years? Following the flame, Jackson didn't sleep. He stayed up pouring through every document, every name on the mysterious list he'd received, the one that ended with his own. He traced the name before his, Abigail Keene, converted. Abigail Keene had survived a barn fire in 1996 in a rural town 2 counties west. She'd been 8 at the time and was said to have drawn unsettling figures in ash before being institutionalized at age 12. No records after that. He contacted her last known guardian, a distant cousin named Clara Minton, now in her 70s. When she answered Jackson's call, she whispered into the receiver like she was being watched. "I knew someone would come one day. Do you know where Abigail went? Number, but I know what she became." "What does that mean?" "They don't just disappear, Mr. Red. They're remade, given new names. They become watchers." "Watchers? Not the kind you can see, not right away." Then the line went dead. Jackson tried calling back. No answer. The photo. The next morning, Jackson received a manila envelope slipped under his apartment door. No return address, no markings. Inside, a single photograph. Black and white. Time-stained. A girl, maybe 10 years old, sitting on the steps of what appeared to be an old Catholic orphanage. Written in red pen on the back, "The Girl Who Lived Twice." 1985. Street, Cecilia's home for wayward children. The girl's face looked hauntingly familiar. Same deep eyes, same crooked left tooth. Jackson placed it next to the recovered hospital ID photo of the Jane Doe from St. Luke's. Identical. If the back of the photo was to be believed, then she hadn't died in the fire at Rosewood Asylum in '85 as reported. She'd been moved to St. Cecilia's, the home for wayward children. St. Cecilia's had shut down in 1999 after several staff were indicted for abuse. The building now sat abandoned, slowly being devoured by vines and time. Jackson drove out alone. The home was a looming gray brick structure with a collapsed roof and broken windows. Local kids had used it as a haunt for years, tagging the walls with graffiti and stories of burning ghosts. Jackson stepped over broken glass into the main hall. Dust clung to everything. Then he saw it. A mural, half burned but still visible. Dozens of children standing in a circle. In the middle, a tall figure in red. Not flames exactly, more like fire worn as skin, and drawn beside it, faint and shaking. The watcher sees through them. Jackson stepped into the old office. Behind a collapsed bookshelf, he found a locked drawer that, to his surprise, opened with ease. Inside was a case file. One name. Patient 12. Evie. Patient 12. Evie. The file was incomplete. Many pages had been torn out or redacted, but the ones remaining painted a disturbing portrait. Subject exhibits dissociative episodes and claims to be two people in one body. Responds to both Evie and Jane. Drawings are consistent with other known survivors of St. Luke's and Rosewood fires. Claims she escaped the furnace by becoming someone else. Another note scribbled in the margin. Careful, she knows. More than she should. Jackson's breath caught. This wasn't just a victim. This was the key witness. Evie, Jane, whatever name she carried, had survived multiple fires, escaped institutions, and carried knowledge others had died for. So where was she now? Surveillance shadows. When Jackson got back to his apartment, something felt off. He checked the door, locked. Windows intact. He flicked on the lights, everything in place. Then he noticed his closet door was ajar. Inside, tucked between jackets, a note, handwritten. "They're watching you now. Stop looking for her." And below that, in childlike scrawl, "He's inside the wires." Jackson's stomach turned. He unplugged everything in the apartment. Modem, router, even the microwave. And that's when he saw the footage. His podcast camera, normally used to record narration, had stored a motion-triggered video clip. Timestamp, 3:47 a.m. The feed showed a figure standing over him as he slept, face obscured, but in their hand, a photo of Evie, the woman in the library. Jackson remembered an email from a woman who said she had information about the girl from the tapes. He'd been too overwhelmed to reply earlier, but now he found her message and arranged a meeting at the University of Iowa's Rare Book Library. Her name was Marla Desmond, a PhD candidate studying occult folklore in Midwestern towns. She greeted him with urgency. "I know who Evie is." "You do?" "Not just her. Others. There's a pattern." She pulled out a thick binder of research. Inside, a page from a 1923 newspaper. Local orphanage burns in night. One girl found alive says she walked through the fire. The girl in the photo looked exactly like the others. Evie, Jane, the girl from Rosewood. You see? Same face, same child, different decades. It's like she keeps coming back. Jackson couldn't believe what he was seeing. How is that possible? It's not reincarnation, it's containment. Whatever this thing is, it hides in her. The Watcher? Maybe. Or maybe she is what's left after he uses them. Where is she now? Marla opened her laptop and played an audio clip. It was from a police interrogation tape from 2014. A woman had been arrested for setting fire to a barn. No ID, no prints. The woman's voice echoed through the room. The fire doesn't kill me. He won't let it. I remember every face I've worn. You don't forget the smell of your own skin burning. Who are you? The detective asked. You already know. Tell me your name. I'm Jane. I'm Evie. I'm the girl in the wall. Jackson shivered. The firebug theory. Marla had one last revelation. A leaked DHS report from 2016 tied multiple cold case fires to a single unidentified female suspect, always just outside the blast radius, often silent, never aged. The code name in the report. Firebug. They think she's a serial arsonist, Marla explained. But it's deeper. She's trying to erase something, or maybe contain it, kill it before it spreads. Why keep showing up? Why the fires? I think she's trying to destroy places that summon him. Jackson paused. The Watcher. And anyone who hears his name, sees his symbol, draws his face, becomes part of him. Jackson leaned forward. So what happens if I say his name? You already did. You said it in the mirror. The reflection. That night, Jackson sat in his apartment, staring at his blank mirror. He couldn't help himself. He had to know. He whispered again, I see you. At first, nothing. Then static filled the air. His speakers, though unplugged, crackled. His phone powered on by itself. The screen displayed only one word. Run. Then everything went black. His mirror cracked. Not shattered, just a single line down the center. And through the silence, he heard it again. A whisper, a child's voice. You're on fire now, too. Jackson Red didn't sleep that night. Not because he wasn't tired, he was, but because sleep had become a doorway. And on the other side of that door, something waited. Watching. When dawn broke, he was still sitting on his couch, staring at the cracked mirror. The line down the center had spread slightly overnight, as though some unseen pressure inside the glass had deepened. And there was something new. In the soft glow of morning, etched just faintly across the broken line, were 4 words. Don't speak his name. Whispers in the static. Jackson couldn't ignore it anymore. This was no longer just about Jane Doe, or Evie, or even the fires. This was about something older, something ritualistic. And the signs, the symbols, were threaded through decades of forgotten tragedies. He powered on his laptop, intending to go back through the voice recordings from St. Luke's. He hadn't listened to all of them, just the ones tagged with Evie's ID number. But now he searched all the files from the 1984 to 85 period, regardless of name. One stood out, labeled Patient 13. The voice in the recording was ragged, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken aloud in years. He's inside the silence. He grows in what's unsaid. Don't speak him. Don't draw him. Don't even dream about his eyes. There was a pause. Then a whisper, too quiet to fully make out. Jackson increased the gain, cleaned the background static, reran the sample through filtering software. Finally, the voice came through, loud and clear. He's in the fire. The fire is his voice. Suddenly, a new fear struck Jackson. His podcast, his audience. How many people had already listened to those recovered clips? How many had heard the screams? The voice? The Watcher? Damage control. Jackson dialed his producer, Claire. Hey Jackson, what's up? You sound... Pull the latest episode, now delete it. What? Why? That thing's blowing up. People are calling it the creepiest drop we've ever done. I'm serious. Take it down. Delete all copies. You're scaring me, man. Just do it. There was a pause. Claire sighed. Okay, but too late to contain it. People have ripped the audio and reposted it everywhere. What about the mirror segment? That part especially. It's going viral on TikTok. Kids are doing some kind of watcher challenge. What kind of challenge? Say, "I see you" in the mirror 3 times and film what happens. Jesus Christ. He hung up. It was already spreading. The first victim. Later that day, news broke in Cedar Rapids. A 16-year-old girl named Jenna Coster had been found dead in her bedroom. No sign of trauma, no drugs or alcohol. The only thing amiss? A cracked mirror with the words, "I see you," written in her lipstick. Jackson drove to the neighborhood, where makeshift candles and teddy bears already lined the sidewalk outside Jenna's home. A neighbor, an older woman, caught him staring at the house. "You a reporter?" Something like that. They said her heart just stopped. No warning. Nothing. But I heard something that night. What did you hear? Like whispering, through the walls, like a TV on with no channel. My lights flickered for hours after. Did she say anything before it happened? Just one thing. To her friend on the phone. She said, "He's smiling behind the glass." Jackson swallowed hard. This was spreading faster than he feared. The Book of Ash. With nowhere else to go, Jackson returned to Marla Desmond, the folklore researcher, for help. She didn't seem surprised when he showed up at her office without calling. "You saw the message, didn't you? In the mirror?" That's how it always starts. She opened an old wooden drawer and pulled out a thin, scorched book. It smelled of charcoal and rot. "What is this?" "I found it in the library basement. Wasn't cataloged. Bound in some kind of skin. Human, maybe." "What's it called?" "We don't know the original name, but in the back someone wrote in English, 'The Book of Ash.'" Inside were pages of rituals, symbols, burned prayers, names. One illustration chilled Jackson. A girl, drawn in crude, jagged lines, staring into a mirror, and behind her, a tall figure with no face, arms stretched across the glass. "It's him," Marla said. "The Watcher. This book, it's not a guide. It's a trap." "A trap?" "Reading it, speaking the words, even understanding it, it makes you part of it. So why keep it? Because we need to understand what we're dealing with." Jackson flipped to the last page, scribbled in frantic red ink. "The only way to stop the fire is to silence the voice. Burn the silence. Burn it before it speaks." A return to St. Luke's, Jackson realized he had to return to where it began, St. Luke's Psychiatric Hospital. Though condemned, the structure was still mostly intact. Over the years, vandals had stripped it bare, but the basement, where the audio archive had been stored, remained largely untouched. He descended the same stairwell he had the first time. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He heard footsteps echo behind him, though when he turned, no one was there. Then he heard her voice. "You shouldn't be here." Evie. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes pale and too wide for her face. Her hair was black and uncombed, her hospital gown stained with soot. "Is it really you?" Jackson asked. "I'm not supposed to be seen, but he already knows you. Are you the one who left the message on my mirror?" She nodded. "He's looking through you now. The podcast, the tapes, they're his now. Every time someone listens, it opens a door. How do I stop it?" She stepped closer. Her voice became faint. "You can't. But you can burn the door shut." "What does that mean?" "No more voices, no more tapes, no more truth." "Then what was the point of all this?" "To warn you. Before you're gone, too." She turned and walked into the shadows of the hallway. "Evie, wait!" He followed, but when he rounded the corner, she was gone. Only one thing remained, a charred tape recorder, and inside it, a tape labeled "Final Voice." The final voice. Back at his apartment, Jackson played the tape. The voice was unlike the others. It didn't scream. It didn't beg. It spoke. Calmly. Slowly. The fire is not the end. The fire is the vessel. The voice rides the smoke. The silence is not empty. It is where I live. You've heard me now. You can't unhear me. Every word you say from this point forward is mine. Then faintly, barely audible, Jackson heard his own voice. This is Jackson Red, and you're listening to Dead Air. The recording ended, and the tape burst into flames inside the player. Jackson smothered it with a towel, heart racing. Then his phone buzzed. A text. No number. Just 4 words. They're burning for you. Fires across the nation. In the next 24 hours, 5 reports came in. A podcaster in Portland died when his studio caught fire mid-broadcast. A teenage girl in Atlanta was found unconscious next to a shattered mirror, her hair singed. An online streamer from Canada vanished during a live stream after saying, "I see you," on camera. A sound engineer in Arizona reportedly gouged out her ears after listening to a distorted whisper loop. A fan in New Jersey posted that he heard the watcher in his sleep and hasn't been heard from since. Each one had interacted with Jackson's content. The watcher was moving through the sound waves, and Jackson realized something horrifying. This wasn't a curse. It was a network. The more people heard, the stronger he became. Burn the silence. There was only one option left. Jackson typed out a final message to his followers, a blog post. He called it, "This is not a story." In it, he explained everything. The fires, the girl, the tape, the watcher, and then he issued a warning. Don't say his name. Don't play the tape. If you've already heard it, destroy your device. Speak to no one. Write nothing. Burn the silence before it burns you. Before publishing, he opened the mirror file on his computer, his most viral clip. Then he deleted it, not just from the server, from everywhere. He scrubbed the drive, wiped the backups, disconnected from the cloud, and finally, smashed the microphone that had started it all. Jackson Red didn't know what silence truly was, not until he destroyed his voice. The podcast was over. The gear was in pieces. The accounts were deleted. His following, once rabid and loyal, was scattered and confused. Conspiracy forums lit up with rumors. Jackson's gone dark. Something happened. Is Dead Air a cover for a real government op? He's pulling a long-form horror ARG, right? But it wasn't a game. And every day, more mirrors cracked. A shadow in the reflection. Jackson boarded up every mirror in his apartment. No reflections. No chance to let him see. Still, when he blinked, he could see the watcher's outline, burned into the inside of his eyelids like a photo negative. A tall figure. No face, no eyes, just presence. He stopped sleeping. His windows stayed shut. His phone stayed off. But the world kept listening. Despite his efforts, mirror challenge videos still trended. Bootlegs of the final voice resurfaced on underground channels. Someone had even remixed it into a lo-fi track on YouTube. They called it Watcher Core, and people were playing it in the background while studying. Jackson sat in his darkened kitchen, head in hands, when a knock broke the silence. Not from the door, from the bathroom. 3 deliberate taps against the mirror. He rose slowly, opened the bathroom door. The mirror was covered in black paint, except for a single circle wiped clean in the center. Through that clear patch, something stared at him. It was his own face, but not quite. The eyes were wrong, too still, too deep. The reflection opened its mouth. Jackson didn't, but his voice came out anyway. "I've already left you. You're just catching up." Across the airwaves, at a small college radio station in Wisconsin, a student intern named Corey Wynn was running the midnight shift. It was a sleepy, lo-fi segment, mostly meant to fill dead air between playlists. Tonight, he played something new, an unmarked CD he found in the lost and found bin labeled only "Do Not Play." Of course, he played it. The recording was short, 20 seconds, a slow, rhythmic whisper that built to a static-laced crescendo. Then silence. Then, "I see you." Corey laughed at first. Creepy, sure, but probably a prank. Then the studio lights flickered. Then the temperature dropped. And then, the mirror in the hallway, an old scratched thing near the restroom, cracked from top to bottom. The station's signal spiked that night. Listeners reported strange interference. One woman said she saw a tall man outside her window, even though she lived on the 17th floor. Another said her baby monitor picked up whispers, in her own voice, calling her by name. And one listener, a blind veteran in Chicago, called in to say, "I've never seen anything in 20 years, but last night, I saw something, a shape, in the dark, watching me from inside my bedroom mirror." Jackson's desperation. Jackson knew he couldn't undo the wave, but maybe he could redirect it. He reached out to the only person who hadn't abandoned him, Marla Desmond. She met him in a park at midnight, both of them bundled in layers despite the summer heat. "It's accelerating," she said. "Faster than I expected. Too many people listened. They're not just hearing him now, they're repeating him." What does that mean? Every time someone shares his voice, they're not just spreading a meme, they're building a ritual. So what do we do? She pulled out a manila folder, thick, worn, and marked with a faded state seal. This is from a closed federal archive. The government looked into this back in '85. Code name was Project Reverberation. They knew the fire wasn't just physical. They suspected it was acoustic. Like sound magic? Not magic. Just a pattern, a resonance. Certain frequencies that alter consciousness, induce suggestion, paranoia, suicide. Why didn't they stop it? Because the moment you study it, you're already compromised. Jackson flipped through the documents. Handwritten notes, Polaroids of burned homes, medical reports of psychiatric staff showing sudden onset schizophrenia, and a final memo. Subject shows aversion to analog signal degradation. Vinyl, cassette, tape warble. It requires fidelity to be understood. That gave him an idea. The analog solution. Jackson tracked down a forgotten studio in Detroit that still produced reel-to-reel tapes. Old school. No digital playback, no viral sharing. If he could trap the voice there, distort it enough, it would be impossible to replicate. He'd record a final message, one designed not to spread the watcher, but to contain him. A kind of audio kill switch. Marla called it the mirror broadcast. They worked together nonstop for 72 hours. The process wasn't easy. The voice fought them at every step. During playback tests, the reels would seize up. Smoke would hiss from the machine. Once, the entire booth filled with the scent of burned hair, and the words on the script would change if you looked away. But finally, they had it. A distorted, looped recording, layered with reversed Latin, sonar pings, and ambient frequencies recorded from active volcanoes. They pressed only 3 copies, each sealed in a lead-lined cassette case, each marked with the phrase, "Break glass only to bury flame." The watcher strikes back. The night they finished the tapes, Marla disappeared. Her apartment was empty. Her phone was fried. Her computer was nothing but melted plastic. But the worst part? Every mirror in her home was shattered inward, as if something had crawled out. Jackson knew what that meant. The watcher wasn't bound to the digital realm anymore. He was in the glass, in the signal, in the space between frequencies. The time for whispers was over. He wanted a stage. The pirate broadcast desperate. Jackson hijacked an unused AM frequency using old HAM radio tech and the reel-to-reel setup. At 3:33 a.m., he began the mirror broadcast. It was never meant to be heard by many, just enough to close the loop. The warped, layered recording was surreal, unintelligible. It sounded like voices drowning underwater, shrieking metal, reversed church bells, and through it all, a heartbeat, slow, relentless. In the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, a ripple. Across the country, people reported strange dreams. In one, a faceless man stood in front of a burning orphanage, whispering, "This time, we burn the silence first." Others reported waking up to find every device in their home dead. And in one apartment in Brooklyn, a mirror exploded the moment the final beat of the mirror broadcast ended. Jackson collapsed in the booth, unconscious. The next morning, headlines appeared. Mystery frequency crashes radios nationwide, experts baffled. Pirate broadcast linked to strange fires, mirror phenomena. Did a podcast host just perform a mass exorcism? The silence that remained. Jackson awoke 2 days later in a hospital bed. The doctors said he was lucky. No burns, no injuries, just empty. As if he'd been vacuum sealed inside his own body. Marla was never found, but one of the 3 cassettes was recovered, intact, buried beneath her apartment in a box marked "Ashes to Ashes." Jackson kept the second. The third? He mailed it to an unlisted P.O. box in Alaska with one instruction: play only when the mirrors crack again. There is a space between stations, a whisper buried between frequencies, not silence, not static. A frequency that doesn't exist on any dial, yet always finds its way to your ears when you're most alone. They call it the dead frequency. And after the mirror broadcast, it woke up. The return of signal 117 6 days after Jackson's pirate transmission, listeners across the Midwest began reporting a mysterious sound interrupting AM broadcasts. The sound was always the same, a soft hum, 3 slow chimes, a child's voice saying, "He's still in the walls." Then silence. No station would claim it. No call letters, no sponsors, no metadata. But one technician at a radio tower in Iowa, Angela Croft, tracked the anomaly. The origin? A decommissioned transmitter known as Signal 117, shut down since 1986 after a fire destroyed the original broadcast facility in rural Missouri. The same fire that began the legend of the Watcher. Angela sent the logs to a private forum of radio hobbyists, asking for help decoding the signal. Within hours, her house burned to the ground. No cause found, no survivors. Her last online message: "I looked in the mirror. He's in the hallway." Marla's last message. 2 weeks passed before Jackson dared to play the recovered cassette, the one he found buried beneath Marla's apartment. He rented a basement motel room, lined the walls in tinfoil, and used an ancient tape deck with a failing motor. As the warped recording began to play, he heard her voice. Not distorted, not reversed, just Marla. Tired, shaking, determined. "If you're hearing this, it means I've failed. I tried to draw him into the cassette, to isolate the tone that binds him, but he adapted. I think the Watcher was never meant to be destroyed, only reflected. Mirrors, recordings, memories. He's not bound to one medium. He is the echo of the crime, the sound that lingers after the scream. Then static, and just beneath it, barely audible, a familiar phrase. The orphanage was never empty." Jackson hit stop, but the tape kept playing. The deck wasn't plugged in. The Watcher's new game. After the mirror broadcast, the Watcher no longer needed Jackson's voice. He had the world's. TikTok users began a new trend, filming themselves staring into mirrors while playing a reversed clip of the original podcast. They called it the Number Mirror Loop Challenge. It didn't end well. Reports emerged of users suffering seizures during playback. One girl in Arizona went live for 45 minutes, staring silently into her mirror. When her mother broke down the door, she found her unconscious with her face pressed against the glass, mumbling Jackson's words in reverse. In Los Angeles, a man smashed every reflective surface in his home, claiming, "They're crawling out now. The signal brought them." Authorities dismissed the incidents as viral hysteria, a copycat phenomenon. Jackson knew better. He saw the map, clusters forming around old towers, abandoned transmitters, places where analog ghosts still breathed, where the dead frequency thrived. A whisper in the static, desperate, Jackson turned to an unlikely ally, Dimitri Vance, a disgraced audio engineer once hired by the Department of Defense to study weaponized sound. Dimitri had since retreated to a life of underground hacking and DIY audio occultism, running a secret server called Hertz Heaven, where forbidden frequencies were traded like rare artifacts. They met in a cold storage locker in Cleveland. Dimitri was waiting, surrounded by towers of old TV sets and CRT monitors, all playing loops of broken mirror footage. "You brought it into the world, man," Dimitri said. "That frequency? It's not new. You just gave it a name. Can we stop it?" "Maybe, but not by erasing it. That never works. You need to drown it out." "With what?" "Something older. Something louder." Dimitri pulled out a reel-to-reel tape labeled 117 Prime. This was recorded during the original orphanage fire in '86. A live mic caught everything: screams, cracks, the watcher's first breath. Jackson listened. He wept. Then he screamed. Then he passed out. When he came to, Dimitri was gone. So was the tape. But something new was playing on every TV screen in the room. A reflection. His own face. But grinning. The truth behind Signal 117 digging deeper. Jackson uncovered sealed government reports dated 1986. Signal 117 was not a regular transmitter. It was a test. A psychological weapon developed during the Cold War to induce fear, hallucinations, and behavioral breakdowns. It used layered binaural beats, subsonic frequencies, and samples from child interrogation sessions conducted at orphanages across state facilities. The tests were shut down after a series of deaths, including 5 researchers who all gouged out their eyes after reviewing the final playback. Their final memo warned, "Subject 017 is no longer passive. It is feeding off reception, reflection, recognition. Do not broadcast." The facility burned down a week later, but the signal never stopped. It had simply moved into the mirrors, into the airwaves, into us, building the null loop. Jackson knew what had to be done. He would build a new broadcast, a null loop designed not to fight the watcher head-on, but to interfere with his signal, like noise-canceling headphones for the mind. To do this, he'd need raw ambient field recordings from fire sites connected to watcher sightings, underground choir tones from Gregorian monks recorded in anechoic chambers, brainwave frequencies used in sleep research to induce lucid dreaming, and one final element: the voice of someone who had heard the watcher and survived. There was only one: his mother, the voice that broke the flame. He returned to his hometown and found her in a nursing home, aged beyond her years, but still lucid. She hadn't spoken of the orphanage fire in decades, but when he placed the headphones on her ears and played a piece of the original mirror broadcast, something changed. Her eyes rolled back. She began to hum, not randomly, but in tune, a low, ancient melody. Jackson recorded everything. As the track looped, the static began to fade. The mirrors in her room stopped vibrating, and for the first time in months, the watcher vanished from his peripheral vision. He had the final piece. Now, it was time to return to Signal 117. The journey back, Jackson, armed with the null loop, traveled to the ruins of the original 117 broadcast station in rural Missouri. What remained was scorched earth, overgrown trees, and rusted tower spines. But deep beneath the ground, in a storm drain once used to house audio cables, he found a small service door. It was locked. Inside, he heard faint whispers and music, a child's lullaby on repeat. He set up his mobile transmitter, placed the tape into the reel, and flipped the switch. The null loop began to play. The earth shook. The signal screamed. Mirrors across the country began to crack, not shatter, just enough to reflect light in a different way. Hospitals reported patients waking from comas. Phones rang with voicemails from the dead, but only static played. And in the ruins of Signal 117, something crawled out of the shadows and stepped into the light. When the null loop played for the first time over the bones of Signal 117, the world didn't end, but something old began to shift. For the first time in decades, the watcher didn't speak. He listened. The emergence, at exactly 3:17 a.m., across every time zone, mirrors began to cloud. Not crack, not break, just fog from the inside. Jackson watched from the ground-level ruins of Signal 117 as the air grew heavy. His reel-to-reel deck groaned as the tape looped, the audio fluttering with age but holding steady. In his headphones, the melody hummed by his mother, wordless, ancient, melded with the sub-bass frequencies. Then, a shape emerged from the shadows of the collapsed bunker. It wasn't spectral. It wasn't demonic. It was a man. Wearing the charred remains of a broadcast engineer's uniform, his ID badge melted into the fabric. His eyes were entirely black. Not evil, just recording. He stepped forward, soundlessly, and opened his mouth. Out came a voice Jackson recognized, his own. I am the copy of a scream, the echo of a death no one saw, the frequency of guilt. The watcher paused, then softly, what will you do with me now? Facing the origin, Jackson didn't run. He removed the headphones. He stood inches from the thing, this living transmission, and did the unthinkable. He played back the first ever mirror broadcast on a handheld recorder. The watcher twitched. His form wavered, as if his existence were caught between VHS tracking lines. But he did not flee. Instead, he sang. It was the same melody Jackson's mother hummed during the null loop, the same song from the tapes recorded in the orphanage's chapel during the 1986 fire. Jackson realized something then. The watcher wasn't just an echo of violence. He was the memory of forgotten children, children who burned without names, children who screamed into microphones that were never meant to record, only to transmit. He was memory turned malignant, broadcast on a loop too long. The children beneath the flame back in St. Louis. Forensic archivist Yasmin Trent had unearthed a sealed box at the Missouri State Record Center labeled Orphan Files, Classified, 1986. It contained 17 black and white Polaroids of children, a redacted registry of names, and one worn cassette marked, "If found, do not play." Yasmin digitized the cassette and immediately went into a seizure. When she recovered, she scribbled a single sentence on a legal pad. The fire was the first broadcast. Authorities chalked it up to stress. But Jackson now understood. The original fire was intentional. The flames weren't an accident. They were a cleansing, an effort to erase the children's voices before they could be heard. But it was too late. One of them had already bonded with the frequency, and he had survived. Inside the signal. The Watcher speaks back at signal 117. The Watcher, no longer hiding, spoke directly to Jackson. They tried to burn me, not to destroy, to silence. But fire records everything, in the cracks of wood, in the hiss of melting tape. I remember them. Every scream, every whisper, every lie Jackson asked, the only question that mattered. What do you want? The Watcher looked to the sky, antennae still embedded in the horizon like crosses. Then he said, I want them to hear. With that, he collapsed into ash, and the air filled with laughter. Children's laughter, not haunting, not malevolent, relieved. The true crime beneath the static. Following the Watcher's disappearance, the Null Loop went viral, not as a podcast, but as a healing frequency. Hospitals reported improved sleep in PTSD patients exposed to it. A psychiatric facility in Michigan used it to help a girl who hadn't spoken in 10 years. After listening, she whispered, "He's not watching anymore." But Jackson wasn't finished, because the Watcher's words lingered. I want them to hear. So he used the podcast, The Fire Within, to tell the true story. Episode by episode, he revealed what had been buried, the government's audio weaponization project known as Project Reverb, the use of orphaned children as test subjects for psychoacoustic experimentation, the facility's fire, staged by officials who knew they'd lost control of the frequency, and how Signal 117 was never truly shut down. It had just gone underground. The public response was overwhelming. Victims' families came forward. A class action lawsuit was filed against the Department of Health and Human Services, the FCC, and several shadow contractors. But the question remained, could a ghost be subpoenaed? Broadcast justice. On the one-year anniversary of the Null Loop's first play, Jackson hosted a live episode from the ruins of Signal 117. With permission from the city and under heavy security, thousands gathered with radios tuned to a specific frequency. At exactly 11:17 p.m., Jackson played a newly mastered loop, layered with the children's recovered names, spoken gently by survivors and their families. Each name was followed by one chime, 17 chimes in total. Then silence, then applause, not thunderous, just enough to be felt. And in that silence, radios across the country briefly picked up a final signal, a voice, a boy's voice. Thank you for hearing us. Then, static, and nothing more. The final reflection. Jackson never saw the Watcher again, but mirrors no longer scared him. He understood now that reflections weren't the enemy. Silence was, because silence had let the crime rot in the dark for too long. It was not the fire that created the Watcher. It was the cover-up, the forgetting, the collective refusal to confront what had been done. The Watcher had never wanted revenge, just remembrance. Legacy today, the Null Loop is studied by audio engineers and trauma specialists alike. It plays in neonatal units, hospice wards, and grief counseling centers. Jackson no longer records horror podcasts. He teaches. He travels to schools and explains how sound can save or scar. And every year, on November 4th, he broadcasts one more loop, 17 names, 17 chimes, and one final message. They are not forgotten. In the weeks after the final broadcast from Signal 117, the world quieted, literally. Emergency call centers reported a sharp drop in noise complaints. Police scanners across Missouri and neighboring states saw a decline in reported unexplained sounds, phantom voices, and domestic disturbances involving mirrors or audio hallucinations. But it wasn't just absence of the Watcher. It was something deeper, something heavier, a weight pressing against the silence. After the Echo, Jackson Walker found himself in an unfamiliar state, peace, the kind that's foreign after decades of dread. He had spent nearly half his life chasing shadows, decoding static, and listening to whispers no one else could hear. Now, with the Watcher gone, or rather, at rest, the noise inside his head had ceased. But peace, Jackson discovered, came with its own form of torment. Because now that the Watcher's voice had gone quiet, other voices could finally speak, his own included. The one interview he avoided with the Watcher's case closed and Project Reverb exposed, journalists and true crime podcasters clamored to interview Jackson. He declined nearly all of them, except one. Kara Linton, a freelance reporter and former volunteer at the very orphanage destroyed in the 1986 fire, had spent years chasing the same questions he had. Kara lost her younger sister, Emily, in that fire. Emily's name was one of the 17 Jackson spoke aloud during the Null Loop broadcast. They met at a quiet park just outside St. Louis. No microphones, no recordings, just a conversation between two people shaped by silence. "You know they'll never stand trial," Kara said. "I know," Jackson replied. "So what's justice now?" "Justice," Jackson said, "is being heard. That's what the Watcher taught me. Not punished, not destroyed, just heard." Kara nodded, tears in her eyes. Then she asked him something he hadn't expected. "Do you think they'll come back?" He didn't need to ask who they were. "Only if we forget them." The Echo researchers. While the mainstream media moved on to fresher headlines, a new field of study quietly emerged among audiologists and cognitive neuroscientists: echo phenomena. At the University of Chicago, a pilot program titled Memory Through Sound began exploring how audio frequencies could store emotional imprints. They tested victims of trauma, asking them to listen to modified null loop patterns. In some, repressed memories returned. In others, phantom sounds emerged. A boy named Dennis, 12, claimed to hear his brother's voice during playback, a brother who died in the orphanage fire and was never officially recorded. The loop triggered selective auditory synesthesia, a rare condition allowing Dennis to see frequencies. He began drawing what he heard: abstract symbols, spirals, and one recurring image. A tall man behind a wall of speakers, smiling faintly. Researchers called the apparition Residual Entity 117. Jackson didn't need a white paper to tell him what that was. Inside the loop, curious and maybe a little scared, Jackson subjected himself to the same tests. Hooked to EEGs and heart monitors, he listened to a reversed, filtered version of the original mirror broadcast, modulated by the null loop. What he saw wasn't terrifying. It was familiar. The orphanage hallway. His childhood room. His mother singing in a corner, clutching a broken cassette player. And the Watcher, not as a monster, but as a boy. A boy with no mouth, no eyes, no ears, just a pair of headphones over a blank, burned face. When Jackson spoke aloud, "I hear you," the figure nodded and vanished. He awoke to find his heart rate calm. His EEG showed no anomalies. The loop was no longer a trap. It had become a bridge. The unsealed tapes. Months later, under mounting public pressure, the Missouri State Archives unsealed more of the orphanage fire documents. What they revealed was worse than any podcast could have imagined. Children were never officially registered under their real names. Several had been part of government relocation programs, removed from abusive homes without follow-up. Audio tests were run without oversight or consent, and early memos referred to the children only by frequency IDs, not names. One document, dated October 17, 1986, 2 weeks before the fire, read, "Subject 017 has begun responding to non-verbal stimulus. There are signs of self-awareness through mirrored sound playback. Containment is advised." Another memo the following day. Subject 017 mimicked researcher's voice, directly, exactly. Lockdown initiated. Subject 017, the Watcher. A boy whose identity had been erased before he ever burned. Now, even the state couldn't say who he had been. But Jackson knew. He had been all of them. Every forgotten voice rolled into one impossible signal. Revisiting the fire. On the second anniversary of the Null Loop, Jackson returned to the orphanage site, now converted into a community memorial garden. 17 white stones sat in a semicircle, each engraved with a single first name. Visitors had left candles, cassette tapes, drawings, and messages scrawled on paper. But Jackson brought something else. He brought a mirror. Small, round, cracked along the edge. He placed it in front of the stones, tilted toward the sun. For a moment, the light reflected perfectly across the memorial. He whispered, "This time we'll keep watching for you." And in that moment, as wind rustled the leaves, Jackson swore he heard it. Laughter. Not haunting, not mournful, just free. From static to symphony. The podcast had ended. Jackson stopped recording. No more horror, no more exposés. But he didn't disappear. Instead, he launched the Archive of Echoes, a global project for survivors of trauma to record their stories, not for fame or attention, but for preservation. Stories submitted anonymously, no titles, no credits, just voice, just memory, and the tagline of every episode, "If no one else will remember you, we will." By year's end, the archive had been downloaded 20 million times in over 40 countries. Other survivors began organizing regional echo gardens, like the Orphanage Memorial, spaces where forgotten stories could be left behind without shame. One was even erected outside an abandoned transmitter site in West Virginia. The movement had gone beyond Jackson. It had become a chorus. The mirror test late one night, Jackson sat in his study, surrounded by old equipment. He found one of his original cassette tapes from the early mirror broadcasts. It was unlabeled, unloved, probably warped beyond use. Still, he played it. To his surprise, the tape didn't hiss or warble. Instead, it played silence, not dead air. Living silence. He closed his eyes. He heard 17 chimes, then nothing. Not emptiness, just rest. The kind of quiet that only comes after the pain. In the beginning, there was only the crackling. Before voices, before fire, before memory, there was a sound with no shape. It waited in the dark. Until someone, some child, listened. Now the silence has returned. But not because the story is over, because it is ours now. The quiet reaches. 3 years after the first Null Loop broadcast, Jackson Walker sat alone at a panel during the Midwest Audio Culture Symposium in Chicago. The room was mostly full. Fans, survivors, students. He wasn't there to tell a story. He was there to answer a question. Can trauma be recorded? A woman in the front row, older, quiet, hands trembling, asked it softly. Jackson paused before answering. He had no tape deck, no microphone, just his voice. Not in the way we think. You can't bottle it. You can't bind it to a waveform. But you can feel it, in distortion, in resonance, in silence. So maybe the better question is, can trauma be heard? The woman nodded and whispered, yes. Later, she left a note with his assistant. It read, "My brother was one of them. He died in the fire. Your story didn't save him, but it saved me." Jackson folded the paper and didn't read another word for the rest of the day. Some echoes don't need repeating. Signal reclaimed. The ruins of Signal 117 had been sold to a preservation nonprofit by the state of Missouri. What remained of the building, a scorched foundation, a few antenna stumps, and a broken transmitter, was converted into the Museum of Lost Frequencies. Inside, visitors could walk through a reconstructed broadcast booth, listen to curated clips from the Null Loop archive, and record their own stories into a constantly rotating frequency that transmitted on an unused AM band only at night. There was no signal call sign, no public directory, just one line carved above the exit. If no one answers, it doesn't mean no one's listening. The booth was never empty. Voices we missed. After the official end of the investigation, new leads began to surface. Not about the Watcher, but about other potential reverb sites across the country. An abandoned naval radio base in Oregon, a mental health institute in upstate New York, a church in Louisiana rumored to house singing ghosts in its basement. Each location had burn scars, audio anomalies, or missing children in its past. Jackson no longer chased these stories, but he listened to every submitted Echo archive recording that mentioned them. One in particular chilled him. A man in his 60s recalled living near the Missouri orphanage as a teenager. One night, he snuck out to smoke behind a fence and heard what he thought were children laughing through the walls. Then he said, "It was almost like the laughter was inside my head, like someone had tuned me in." He never forgot that sound, and he'd never laughed since. Jackson's final loop. At age 46, Jackson recorded what he called his last entry. He didn't title it, he didn't script it, just a room tone, followed by a deep breath, and then, I don't think the Watcher ever wanted revenge. He just didn't want to be alone anymore. And maybe that's what every ghost really is. Loneliness recorded at high volume. If you're listening to this, it means you're still here. And maybe that's all that matters, that we keep listening. If no one else will remember you, I will. Then static, followed by one final sound, a child's heartbeat. A new generation. 10 years after the final Mirror broadcast went silent, an 11-year-old girl named Zoe Palmer uncovered an old cassette player in her grandmother's attic. It was wrapped in a scarf, sealed with black electrical tape. On the tape, one word, scrawled in pen. Listen. She played it, and heard nothing. Then, slowly, beneath the noise floor, her grandmother's voice, singing softly. The same melody Jackson's mother once hummed. Zoe ran downstairs in tears, clutching the recorder. Her grandmother was in hospice near the end. But when Zoe held the recorder close, the woman smiled, reached out, and whispered, "That song kept me alive." No one knew the tape existed. No one had heard it since the fire. But somehow, across time, pain, and static, it had survived. And now, it belonged to someone new. Beyond the broadcast, the Museum of Lost Frequencies eventually added a second wing, dedicated not to audio horrors or government conspiracies, but to healing. Visitors could sit in private booths, listen to loops of affirmations submitted from around the world, or upload their own memories. A sign above the hallway reads, "Frequency is memory. Memory is love." In one corner of the building, a small mirror hangs on the wall. Cracked, smudged, no plaque. But when light hits it just right, visitors swear they can see a boy smiling. No headphones, no burns, just a face at peace. Epilogue. What we hear when we're alone. There are still those who believe in the Watcher, not as a monster, not even as a ghost, but as a symbol. A reminder that silence can be dangerous, that truth isn't just told, it must be heard. And when someone finally listens, truly listens, the world can begin to heal. So tonight, if your radio crackles, if your mirror shivers, if the air grows still, don't be afraid. It's not the Watcher coming back. It's just memory, finally finding a voice. Story 2. Welcome to the town of Melville Falls, a sleepy place that hides a secret as deep and dark as the old woods beyond its edge. Locals call it the Hollow House, a place so cursed no one dares to live there for long. But what if the horrors hiding inside that crumbling house are only the beginning? Tonight, we peel back the layers of a case so twisted it left even seasoned detectives speechless. Stay tuned, because what they found beneath the hollow house will haunt you forever. Arrival at the house. The rain pelted down on the cracked shingles of 1249 Eastwood Lane, the so-called hollow house. It stood at the end of a long, weed-choked driveway that twisted like a dying snake through the woods. A single flickering street lamp cast just enough light to illuminate the peeling white paint, the broken windows, and the black, yawning front door. Detective Lisa Grant stood in the pouring rain, her flashlight slicing through the darkness. Her partner, Detective Daniel Mendez, hunched beside her, collar up against the wind. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Lisa's jaw was tight. The neighbors called it in, said they heard screaming coming from inside. And that smell. She paused, pressing a hand to her nose. The rancid stench of decay seemed to seep from the house itself. They shared a look, one that spoke of too many crime scenes, too many horrors. Together they stepped inside the hollow house. The inside was worse than the outside, rotting floorboards that creaked underfoot, mold that spread across the walls like disease, cobwebs that brushed their faces like skeletal fingers. The smell was unbearable. "Jesus," Daniel muttered, pulling his shirt over his nose. "Just keep moving," Lisa ordered, voice trembling. Her flashlight beam caught something on the wall, an old newspaper clipping tacked haphazardly with a rusty nail. It was yellowed and brittle, the headline barely legible. "Missing girl, age 8. Last seen near Eastwood Lane." Lisa's stomach twisted. She remembered that case, barely. It had gone cold decades ago. "Over here," Daniel called from the kitchen. Lisa followed the beam of his light. He was standing by a trapdoor in the floor, its edges warped and broken. She crouched down, running a hand along the splintered wood. "It's been nailed shut," Daniel said. Lisa's pulse quickened. "Get the crowbar." The trapdoor. It took both of them to pry it open. The smell that burst forth was like a punch to the gut. Decay, rot, death. Lisa gagged, turning her face away, but forced herself to look. A rickety wooden ladder led down into darkness. Daniel swallowed. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lisa nodded. "Let's go." They descended carefully, each step creaking ominously. The air grew colder, damper. At the bottom was a dirt floor, littered with broken bottles and scraps of torn fabric. But then they saw it, a shallow grave, freshly disturbed, with a child's shoe poking from the loose soil. Lisa's flashlight beam trembled. "Call for backup," she whispered. The discovery. It took hours. Uniformed officers arrived with shovels, lights, and evidence bags. As the soil gave way, the horror revealed itself. 3 small bodies, all children, their remains tangled together like broken dolls. Lisa felt tears burn at her eyes. She tried to steady her breathing. Each of the children had been buried with a scrap of newspaper in their tiny fists. One headline read, "Killer at Large." Another, "No clues in missing children case." A third, "Hollow house. A cursed place?" Daniel turned to her, his face ashen. This is going to blow the lid off this town." Lisa nodded, but her gut told her it was only the beginning. The forensic team worked through the night. The news spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the scene, their cameras flashing in the darkness. Lisa stood on the lawn, watching the chaos unfold, and then her phone rang. "Detective Grant?" It was the coroner, his voice tight. "You need to get down here. We found something under the bodies." Lisa's heart pounded. "What is it?" There was a pause. "A tunnel, detective. A tunnel that leads deep under the woods. And there's something down there." Lisa felt her stomach drop. Daniel appeared beside her, eyes wide. "What's going on?" She turned to him, her face pale. "It's not over," she whispered. "It's just beginning." Last night, Detective Lisa Grant and her partner Daniel Mendez uncovered 3 small bodies buried in the dirt beneath the hollow house. But the horror didn't stop there. Beneath the graves, a tunnel, a passageway carved deep into the earth, waited in the darkness. And what it concealed would shake the entire town to its core. The decision. Lisa stood at the edge of the tunnel entrance, her flashlight beam trembling over the ragged opening. Earth walls crumbled at the edges, revealing layers of old, compacted dirt. A cool draft wafted upward, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid. Daniel crouched beside her, eyes wide. "We should wait for backup," he urged. Lisa's jaw was tight, her mind racing. She could almost hear the clock ticking, the seconds slipping away. If there were any survivors or even clues to what had happened here, every moment counted. "Call them," she said, voice firm. "But I'm not waiting." Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but I'm going in with you." The descent. They descended carefully, the makeshift steps little more than hastily dug footholds in the earth. The air was damp and cold, wrapping around them like a shroud. Their flashlights barely pierced the gloom, casting shifting shadows that made the tunnel feel alive. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. Every step seemed to echo, a hollow sound that made her stomach tighten. She glanced back at Daniel, whose face was set in grim determination. "How far do you think it goes?" Daniel whispered. Lisa shook her head. "Far enough to hide a secret this big." The passageway. The tunnel stretched on, twisting and turning like a serpent beneath the earth. Bits of old newspaper and tattered fabric littered the floor, remnants of a hidden world no one had seen in years. And then they saw it. A small wooden door, half-rotted and hanging on rusted hinges. Lisa pushed it open, the sound of creaking wood echoing through the darkness. Beyond was a chamber, a small underground room lined with shelves. On each shelf were objects, old dolls with missing eyes, small shoes covered in dust, children's drawings curled at the edges. Each item was carefully labeled with handwritten tags. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Jesus, Lisa, it's like a trophy room." Lisa felt bile rise in her throat. She picked up one of the dolls, its porcelain face cracked and dirty. The tag read, "Emily, 8 years old, taken from Hollow House." The trophy room. They moved through the room slowly, each shelf a testament to the horror they were uncovering. Lisa felt tears burn at her eyes as she read the names, each one a child that had vanished, each one a name on a cold case file that had haunted her for years. "This guy, he kept records," Daniel muttered. "He wanted to remember them." Lisa felt anger boiling beneath her skin. "He's a monster," she whispered. A sound from deeper in the tunnel froze them both.